Hi, everybody. I'm here with the wonderful Trish Blain, and we decided to record something because we were actually chatting. We're doing a course together called Non-Ordinary Sensemaking,
Yeah.
which I've mentioned a couple of times on the Substack. And we were talking about we have a taster coming up, a free taster session, which is coming up on Thursday the 13th. We were on a call, I don't know, a couple of days ago, just
Yeah.
figuring out like what we're doing in the taster, etc. And then we got talking about the difficulty in some ways of explaining a course that's centered around helping people take information from different states of consciousness that they've accessed or can sort of like lean into accessing
Right.
and applying them to the world. And it's a tricky thing because states are
Right.
experiences, right? And
Right.
then we were talking about the kind of the discomfort both of us have with marketing in general, and the
Right.
sense of like feeling this kind of strange tension between, like, it is a really innovative course. I'm really excited about this
Yeah.
course because I think it fills a lot of gaps in the worlds of cultural analysis, systems change, sort of developmental thinking. That for me is really exciting. And then it's just the tangle of sort of like, where do you begin? How do you explain it? So what we thought we would do is just think out loud together
Yeah.
and do that. So yeah, what are you thinking, Trish?
Yeah, it's funny the whole marketing piece because we were like we just want to be transparent about this. Like it's so hard. And you know what, one of the things that um over the last couple of years I've had this intention of creating like non-ordinary marketing. Like what does that marketing look like that matches the way that I want to experience and how I do experience the world. And it's challenging. It's got to talk about state-based. When you start to do marketing, like we were kind of laughing about this, and that's also like a struggle, but you get caught up in this certain it's a field. It's got its own sort of you get caught up in the whole this is how you're supposed to do it and this is what it looks like. And so we were really consciously saying let's unplug from that. Let's not do it that way. And at the same time it's like we want to tell people about the course. We want people to join in and come and there's we've also had several conversations over the years too around money, and there's so many people. Money is such a tricky one, and we've talked about doing some leadership stuff in the future and addressing that directly.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
we were like,
definitely.
what if we just talked about it and just put it out there? So what's your
Yeah, yeah.
thoughts on that?
Well, what's coming up for me is actually when you talked about marketing being a particular field that you enter,
Yeah.
but that's actually very cool. Yeah, as we've developed the course and as we've been talking about this, I've been thinking about states of
Yeah.
consciousness in
Right.
general, and how I think what's just clicked for me a little bit just now as we're talking is like, when I hear states of consciousness, I think I think of like the extremes, like a psychedelic state or the flow state, or
Yeah.
the state of being in love, like all these kind of like, or being really, really sad. Like these are all different states that many of us will access in our lives in some way, right? Or what, seeing a beautiful sunset and just feeling completely in the moment and connected to nature. These are kind of these peak. I think we have a kind of tendency to think of states as these peak experiences,
Right.
wherever that peak might be. But actually, we're always in a different state. Being, from being hungry changes the way we think. We're in a different state of mind. Being focused on, say, marketing something is a
Yeah.
different state. And I think what's really interesting, and I think this is why it fills such a gap for me personally in terms of sense making, and also just looking at culture, is that if we understand that, we open up a whole new realm of understanding what's going on more than we currently do, perhaps, because there's different rules and different, like, a state isn't just a perspective you're looking at. It's like an entire context and like a whole way of being and feeling that you're in, and that
Right.
completely changes how you interpret information, how you communicate,
Right.
what you think is possible and not possible. And so, you know trying to figure out what's going on in the world is extremely complex, and in some ways the job is to honor that complexity by while also sort of doing it step by step. If we're training, training sense making, that's been my experience.
Right.
But at the same time, it's very additive, and that's what I love about your approach, because it's like, okay, if we're trying to make sense of what's going on, we need to understand different aspects of culture. We need to have like the rational sense making skills of, like being kind of aware of bias, steel manning, for example, how do you put yourself in
Right.
another position? But then we have to add on to that all the stuff around states and also, developmental thinking. And there's probably loads of other add-ons that no one's discovered yet. But something I think is really essential to add on that could open the door for lots of other ways of making sense of what's going on is around states. And that's kind of, I think, for me, what excites me the most about it, because that's what I found one of the most useful things about us working together, and learning your model, learning the non-ordinary approach, particularly learning the four forces, is that it's additive but also adds in states as well. And I
Yeah.
think that's exciting, because I kind of want to bring that to people, because it is, for me, it's opened up a lot more. It's made it easier to navigate the world, basically, and my own life. So I think that's kind of a, yeah.
Right, right. And when I first started, the question that sort of prompted the non-linear approach and the four forces in particular was around the idea of like, there's so many different versions of a better world. How do we actually create one? And are there any common denominators? So it started from a place of desires. What are the things that we all want if you're naming a better world? But as I worked with it, I found, oh, these are connection, expression, purpose, and growth are the four forces. But as I was working with them, a simple desire like wanting to be loved or love or belonging, right? Well, how do we do that? There's skills involved. But then the more I worked with it, there's skills in order to be able to get that. But what we're really trying to do is, if we have a desire to belong, we're wanting a state of consciousness. What we're pursuing is a way of feeling, a way of experiencing life, and when you start to look at desires from that standpoint, it changes things. So, for example, we were chatting about, like the idea of a race car or having a fast, fancy car, right? Like you could judge that and say, if you're somebody who's more connection purpose, and say, well, that's just useless and frivolous. But if you look at it as literally a vehicle, both in terms of being a vehicle, but also a vehicle to get you to a certain feeling, a certain state of the world, of feeling powerful and masterful and alive, because, right? Well, then that becomes, the car is now a gateway to a state of consciousness that I would map into growth, this idea of aliveness, of life force, of emergence, and tomorrow being better than today, of novelty. So if you start to look in the section, the middle three um, uh, modules in the middle three modules for the course are all about mapping, using the four forces to map some of the issues that are happening in the world. And if you start to see it, of like, everybody's trying to get a certain kind of feeling, and we just have preferences for those feelings, right? Some people want to feel safety and other people want freedom, and then there becomes this polarity between safety and freedom. But it's not just the specifics of whether, don't tell me what to do. It's a feeling that people are wanting. It's a way of being and a way of perceiving the world. So if it makes it much easier to understand where somebody's coming from the place of what are they trying to feel. And if you can address it, I think one of the things that to me has also been really helpful around the idea of additive that you were just talking about too, is that it changes the way you think about evolutionary development. When I was originally introduced to spiral dynamics, I was like, oh my gosh, it maps directly on top of it, right? But the idea of a lot of these is that you have to go through the stages. And I started to think, wait, what if it's more that we're trying to get these particular, based on our culture, based on our desires, we're creating strategies like, I want more safety because maybe I've had trauma in the past and I want a safer life. That would be more of a purpose-based strategy. So if you start to think of them as what are people wanting and work with that, you can't say to somebody that wants freedom, and autonomy in self-expression, stop doing that and come over here and sing Kumbaya and, let's all be
Yeah.
one. They're going to be like, yeah, no, thanks. Right. But if you can approach somebody and say, you get to have freedom and individuality and get to have connection, you get to add that, and it actually enhances your individuality in this really paradoxical way. Like, more connection actually helps you feel more distinctly you. When you can feel others and feel yourself, it's very paradoxical. But that's a state that's even beyond just feeling yourself or feeling others. Being able to feel yourself and feel others is a whole other
Yeah,
state. And
yeah, yeah.
that's what I see as what we need to do to really shift into the paradigm or the game B or second tier or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm just thinking of the amount of times in our sessions that you've given me over the last 3 years that you said rub your belly and pat your head at the same time, or some variation of that, because
Right.
but it's I mean, and that's key to like integral or meta modern thinking as well. But the difference I think is that while those are really valuable models in terms of actual practical day to day life, I found the four forces more immediately practical because it's about real life stuff, right? It's about like, okay, how do I feel myself in relationship as well as the other person, instead of my default. And I think many of us have a lot of black and white thinking, like I'm either feeling myself or I'm feeling the other person, and I can't do both at the same time.
Right.
But I think what's great is that you absolutely can do both at the same time. It just requires practice. You just have to
Right.
practice doing it. And I have genuinely noticed a shift in myself over the last few years of being getting better at that. Obviously, it's still not easy depending on what it is, but some things have become much easier. Where I'm like, oh yeah, I can feel this and feel something else at the same time, and it's not either or. It is genuinely a yes and that I think. And the other thing that's was coming up for me as you were talking was around basically the different types of state. If I think about integral, for example, there's a real focus on a particular type of like peak state, which is the very sort of ego dissolving peak state,
Right.
right? Which is like one from
Right.
Eastern spiritual tradition, and there's a reason for that, and it's because that was very popular with boomers, who kind of were switched on in the late 60s and early 70s. That was the type of spirituality coming into the West as the kind of
Right.
compensation for a rigid structure, right? And so that kind of makes sense. But it gets people all sorts of tangled because they think, okay,
Right.
that's the thing I should be going for. I should be going for like dissolving my ego, and then I'm going to be one with all
Right.
things. And it's like that's one of many different peak or just general states of being. And like you're saying, like that's a connection state. And so if you are looking for deep connection, even socially, like you said, like, and a lot of this was very true, even in the 60s, it's a great example. Like a lot of people felt disenfranchised, or like, no, they felt like kind of excluded from culture because they were a little bit more sensitive, or they were a little bit
Right.
weirder, they were more artistic. And so it was like, it makes sense that they would then go for a connection focused type of spirituality. But an Abrahamic sort of,
Mm-hmm.
model, so like you get in Christianity, is much more like prophetic, and it's like the burning bush is talking to you, and you're going to get purpose driven. You're going to go out into the world and like
Right.
bring these tablets down the mountain and be like, everybody, I've got 10 commandments and this is what we do now. And it's like, those are completely different mystical experiences. So that's again like the peak. But then there's also all these like regular everyday
Right.
states that we're in. And then the other thing that was coming up for me is that we also, to your point about the fact that, yeah, we're looking for something when we're kind of leaning towards different states, is that also one thing that's very important is how to apply what we learn in the state to day-to-day life. Because like if we can do that, then we can actually kind of make, sorry, my dog is walking past the cable for the computer. um, if we can
Please.
do that, we can actually practically make changes in our life and interact with people in a different way, because anyone can have a state. Like John Vervaeke makes the point
Right.
that like the gambling, like the kind of flow state that people are in when they're hitting slot machines for like 6 hours a
Right.
day, that's a flow state.
Right.
100% a flow
Right.
state.
Yeah.
But as he points out, it lacks virtue, or another way to say that is like it lacks this kind of deeper connectedness to something important and meaningful. And so it's about like, it's not just about states, it's about how do we apply. And that's like a big part of what the thrust of my book is about. It's like you can
Right.
apply different states give you access to different information you can't get anywhere else. And then you can
Right.
apply that information across domains and across states. And that's like the peak of sense making that I'm aware of right now, which is again what I'm really excited for us to explore. The course is like I'm not aware of anyone bringing those all together at the moment. So that's kind of why I'm, yeah, one of the reasons I'm excited.
Yeah, and I mean, there's several things here. I think, when you're doing the slot machine and you're in that flow state, there's a certain amount of automatic, no choice to it, right? Versus
Hmm.
if you can still have the pleasure of being in that flow state and be aware of it, that you're choosing to be in that state and not be so automatic robot kind of feeling to it, or oh, it took me over like an addiction or something, or wow, where'd the time go? But to be able to actually pick and choose what state you're in, um it's not about being in one particular highest state. And I think that's where what you're just alluding to too, or speaking about, was with a lot of the traditions, the spiritual traditions, the peak state is to be beyond the human, beyond the physical, and no state and no ego. But then where did it, it's blissful. There's a pleasure to it. Absolutely. It's incredibly blissful to feel the oneness and love, and or even beyond oneness and just pure awareness. Like that's an ecstatic state. And what I found is it's there's it's not, it doesn't have movement to it, it doesn't have aliveness to it, it just has beingness to it. It has there's no there's no movement. So the idea of aliveness or sexual energy is often excluded from that because it's a different lever. You even saying like the virtue or around purpose, or a lot of us, I would say, that are more purpose driven, kind of coming back to the conversation about marketing and money and blah blah blah. I would do all of this for free because it's fun. And that wasn't always true, because when I, for example, being more of a purpose driven kind of person, you get burnt out. Like there was a place where part of this work the last few years with the pandemic, I was realizing I've been having this drive to want to help and suffering. And then I got to the point where I'm like, I'm burnt out and I'm not even sure I care anymore. I'm tired. What's in it for me? And that sounds incredibly selfish, right? But from looking at what's in it for me, I now feel like I've infused the work with fun in a way that, like, why would somebody want to, I had somebody say this to me. They're like, Trish, why would I want to do what you do? You seem tired and burnt out and all you do is help other people. Like that's not that attractive to want to come over and sacrifice with me, right? And that's what a lot of religions do. That's a lot of what a lot of the activists are also like, we must give up and sacrifice. And I'm like, the hell with that. Like let's use it from a place of desire. What do we want to call into the world? What do we want to bring in and create? And I think that translates all the way down to like when you get up and you're in your relationship, like are you having pleasure in your relationship? Are you having mind-blowing sex? Are you having a relationship that supports both your individuality and your we-ness and oneness, and being able to do both in the relationship? Or are you feeling like you're having to sacrifice one for the other, or at battle all the time between what you want and what the relationship, the we-ness wants? It's like I don't know, I get really excited about, I want it all. Like I want access
Yeah.
to all the states. I want to be able to navigate and do all of them. And I think that's why I've loved working with you too, as much as I think, you're also a purpose person, in your past, there's this desire for that, the new, like, the new territory. All right, we've got the sense making of black, white, and gray. What about Technicolor? Like, let's be in new territory.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I feel excited right now because I'm thinking about like that sense of freedom to experience different states and then make that part of the human experience and how we go through life. I mean, that's been like foundational to my entire adult life. Like
Right.
the care for that, and like being very involved in psychedelic activism, and like it's not necessarily about, it's not, for me it's not really about like the molecules. It is as well, but it's about freedom. It's about like basically what is opened up when we can experience different aspects of being human being, and there's so many more than the sort of regular boring kind of state sanctioned states that you can go, yeah, state sanctioned, actually kind of cool, that you can go into, which is like waking, sleeping, uh, caffeinated alcohol, sugar,
Right.
uh, that's kind of it, right? And so, and there's just like there's a whole world of rich experience, and also this sense of, it's really funny. I was listening to this to actually Akira the Don's Alan Watts music, where it's kind
So
of Alan
cool.
Watts talking over
Yeah.
music, which is great. Just earlier today, and there's this great quote by Alan Watts, which I've heard a few times, where he's like, it's a really good practice to just assume that you're completely selfish and you're, what does he say, a complete rascal. Because what it does is you're like, because this is something I think that ties into states, it ties into sense making. It's like trying to be a certain way rather than relaxing into like the whole breadth of human experience, because so many of the different practices that have states attached to them are really like, no, you've got to be like this. You're going to meditate, but you've got to meditate like this, and you're going for this thing, and you're going to have this experience, and other things are not acceptable in this, because there's kind of like a state. I think I wrote about this in the piece that included the interview with you a few weeks ago. But like, there's kind of a state. There's an obsession with a particular state. It's like, no, we
Right.
do meditation. We don't do the tantric stuff. No, we're and I've spent time in a Zen, a Zen retreat for a
Yeah.
few days, and the monks were really really sweet and very nice. But I remember asking them, I was like, what do you got? Because I was feeling something. I was quite young. I was probably like 20, 22 or
Yeah.
something. And I was like, something is missing here. Something's missing here about this whole lifestyle. And I
Yeah.
asked them whether they party, because I used to party a lot back then. So I was like, do you guys ever party? And they were like, oh, yeah, we party. Once a year, we have a barbecue. And I was like, that's
Oh
not what I was
man,
that
right.
one. And in retrospect, if I was to use the four forces, I was like, what was massively lacking was growth. Like there was
Right.
no sense of just like this aliveness, and like,
Right.
like the experiences I've had in sort of group work before, where it's like, yeah, okay, there's movement in that. And, and then there'll be a lot of movement, growth, tantric embodiment people who can't sit and just be. Like, so
Right.
it's not either or. You need, like, this is the whole point of the four forces. You need all of them together in order to have that kind of rich life, but also a full sense making, because otherwise it's
Right.
narrowly focused on particular states.
Well, and it's also, we don't actually know how to get what we're wanting, actually. So we can chase something, if I'm wanting to feel more alive, and I'm like, okay, meditation, people have said meditation's the way. You're never going to feel the same kind of aliveness by pursuing meditation, that you're going to feel pleasure and bliss, and it's a wonderful, like, worthwhile lever and worthwhile state. And I think consciousness, my particular personal view is consciousness is the foundation of everything, or it is the soup of
Okay.
which everything else comes from, right? In
Yeah.
my, however you want to name that. But and that's a wonderful state. And as humans, we have this individuation, and this, with life force, you feel desire. And that's one of the reasons, I think, too, in some of these traditions, it's like desire is the enemy, because if you feel desire, if you have life force moving through your alliness, and you're gonna feel desire. That's where desire comes from. That's,
Mm.
we often name it as sexual desire, but it's desire is bringing something into form that wasn't there before. If we think of it as a gap of something that's wanting to come in, instead of a lack or a way of sort of pursuing something that we don't have. The problem is, often we're in the pursuing something we don't have, we actually don't know how to get it. We keep doing the
Mm.
same thing over and over again, thinking it's going to get us what we want. So, somebody who I think we've all had this experience, like, you have somebody, I remember being in New York City, and I was in a cafe, and it was really packed, and I had a seat open, and somebody said, "Hey, can I sit here with you?" And I said, "Sure." She sat down, and then she started just talking. And she talked for like an hour, right? And like nonstop. And I was fine. I was kind of just shooting some time, and it was fine. And it was fascinating. So I was just in that space where it wasn't a problem. But at the end of it, she was like, "Oh my God, I feel so connected to you. I feel so," right. And I'm like, that's
Mm.
actually not connection. That was, a whole lot
Mm.
of expression. And but she
Yeah.
wasn't actually feeling me. She wasn't actually, right.
Yes. Yeah.
And yet I know she was desiring connection, but doing it that way, she's not actually ever going to feel satisfied. She's always going to
Of
keep doing
course.
the
Yeah.
pattern of talking and looking for somebody, but it's not actually ever going to hit the spot. So even in the moment we think it is, like her saying, "Oh, I feel so connected," like there's some piece there that somebody was paying attention to her and feeling her. I was feeling her. I was connecting with her. I was fascinated by sort of what was happening, and I was really tuned into her. And so she experienced me connecting to her, but she didn't feel me.
Mm.
And feeling me is a whole other experience, or feeling me feeling her is a whole other experience. So there's all these little levers that give you more choices, and you can't, there's so many ways that we're pursuing things that aren't actually giving us what we're wanting.
Yeah.
But the promise is, well, if you have this higher state, everything's going to be okay. And I'm like, well, we're also here in these meat suits to have an experience in our human. So let's do human,
Yeah.
as
Yeah. Yeah.
big and as multidimensional as possible. And I love that about your work, because it's not, you do it on a personal level. It's this fractal, like the thing
Mm.
I love too is these same states that we're talking about, the skills that we're talking about, they apply at every level.
Yeah. That's what I was literally just about to say,
Yeah.
about the, and that's what one of the things we're going to be looking at in the course is, okay, how do you look at different, well, I guess what Peter Lindbergh and Connor Barnes call Memetic Tribes, these different
Right.
tribes within the culture wars and in culture in general, whether they're traditionalists or social justice
Right.
activists or whoever it might be, different fandoms online. Like, what is it that what desire are they trying to get met? And the four forces are super effective for that, and it helps because it's like, oh, okay, it switches into, like we said at the beginning, what is the state that they're trying to experience rather than what is the argument they're trying to make? Because actually, when you go to the level of the argument, very little makes sense. Ideologies are complete
Yeah, you're like, why
tangles.
would,
They're
right.
contradictory, hypocritical, mainly fantasy on all sides of the political spectrum. It's like, we're going to have a world in which this happens. Either it's like, go back to the 1950s, or a world of pure equality, or whatever it might be. It's like, they're not, the reason they don't make sense logically is because they're not actually coming from that place primarily. And of course there will be elements of them that are and do make sense, and are
Right.
theoretically sound, but overall, when you actually, and I do workshops with difficult conversations, and what I noticed, and I'm like, it's not really about the content at all.
Right.
It's like, it's a little
Right.
bit, but mainly, and we noticed this through Rebel Wisdom as well, and sense making, is like, most of us don't have enough expertise in a lot of the issues that we care about to actually have that conversation, because you need to just be a full-on expert, like whether
Right.
that's in biology or whether it's in social theory or whatever it might be. And sometimes we can get enough expertise, of course, to talk about something, go into it. But what's way more interesting is to go, what are you actually trying to get? Like, what is this coming from? Because from that place,
Right.
I actually had a thought come up before when you talked about steel manning. I was like, I think what we're one of the skills we kind of want to teach is a little bit more like clay manning, where it's like, because like steel, it's got this sense of like, it's impenetrable, and it's like, I'm
Right.
going to take on your position, and I'm going to sort of like robotically be able to exactly say what the position is of the other person. I'm like, well, that's not that helpful really, because we're not robots. And it's a little bit helpful. It can open the conversation about, but what people really want from a side of a cultural conversation is, do you feel me? Do you understand how I see the world, and can you feel that
Right.
perspective? And
Right.
that's more like clay. It's like, it's moldable, and it doesn't completely change its constitution, but it can mold and adapt. And I think that's way more effective.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's, you know, if you really look at what are people trying to get, and then if you're really sort of in a facilitation role, or in a position of leadership, or in a place where you want to really have an impact and make a difference, the biggest way you can do that is not to change somebody's mind, it's to actually help them get what they're wanting.
Mm,
Right. So if you can
yes.
actually help them get what they want in a way that actually is in alignment with life and with others, rather than contrary or in opposition to something, and do it from that perspective, there, that helping each other actually get what we deeply desire shifts everything. It's a completely different perspective to say, how do I change them? How do I manipulate them? I'm going to have a difficult conversation, but you've got an agenda, right? In the
Yeah.
meantime, right? But if you really are like, what are they really wanting? And how can I really help them get that? It changes everything, how people
Yeah.
approach you. And it's often not about the issues that are happening. I'm the issues are important, but it's what's underneath that's really important, and it's pretty controversial, but I think every group that's out there, if you start to look at it from the four forces, every group that's out there is holding one of the forces dearly for dear life, saying this
Yeah.
is the most important. And the truth is they're
Yeah.
all important. And
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
and if you look at that in your individual lives, look at how many, how many relationships do you have the same topic of argument come over and over again? Because it's not about the issue, it's about what's underneath and what are you actually trying to get.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I love your work. I just love too that like you do the personal growth piece, but you're also looking at the cultural and the groups all the way. There's all the different fractal of it. And it's all important, but we're not often thinking about it as collective growth, not just from
Mm.
it's not just coherence in we space. It's how do we be individuals in groups? That's the pat your head, rub your tummy, moment. Or in relationships, how do you be as deeply in a relationship as you possibly can be and as much an individual as you possibly can be at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah. And
You know?
the whole thing uh, happens in a non-linear way, right? Like, we were talking about this earlier where there's different developmental philosophies like integral, and they point out like that, the fact that, or spiral dynamics, that humans develop and grow and kind of become
Yeah.
more complex over time. But very often there can be a real deep confusion that there's some kind of like process that happens linearly, first this step and then this step. And actually there's so many, it's non-linear, as you've talked about, right? It's happening
Right.
in this kind of much more complex way. And I think looking at it from a kind of non-ordinary perspective and a state-based perspective, it actually allows for that complexity instead of like, okay, well, first, because I mean, you see what happens in the integral worlds. Everyone thinks they're at sort of second tier level. Everyone wants to be at the top of the linear
Right.
progression
Right.
automatically, and that makes it in one sense extremely limited. Instead, if it's non-linear, then it's a little bit more like life, because in life you have different domains, you have different skills. Some are more developed than others. Sometimes you can be in your adult self, sometimes you're in your inner child. Like it's a flow. It's a very complex flow of experience, and the whole culture is doing that at the same time, and the whole
Well,
culture's
right.
development as well. Yeah.
Right. And we put teachers up on a pedestal, right? That's one of the things I think that
Mm.
you and I have also talked about some, right? We don't want to be the guru that has the answers, but you also are at the edge leader. You are somebody who's leading at this edge of unknown territory, right? In your personal life, I know that to be true of you with your book and with the trial. Being at that edge is a different skill set also. But we get shocked when a guru has a sex scandal or, is an asshole or is a narcissist. They're spiritual. They should be, beyond all that. But if you
Mm.
start to map it, it's like it makes total sense that without all four forces, the thing that is your gift also becomes your out of
Yeah.
balance aspect of it. So somebody who's a guru and able to have access and have a certain charisma, if you don't have connection skills and purpose skills really to anchor in that expression, that power, that charisma, then you turn into a narcissist. People are complex and you can have incredible gifts in one area and be lacking in another.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think there's something about state competence in that as well, because a lot of those gurus, they they have practices that include one or more deep states of consciousness that then change your perception, and they can really open up
right,
whole ways of seeing, but they can also, you're very susceptible, and if we don't know how to navigate different states, then we can easily, our sense making can be totally hijacked, because we're like, wow, yeah, God, yeah, that person is so like,
yeah,
you kind of get projections, you get tangles, you get confusions. And so like, that's one of many reasons why, whether it's breath work, whether it's yoga, whether it's psychedelics, whatever it might be, like we need to get good, or we have the opportunity and the privilege to like get good at navigating different states, because that is like part, I actually think it's like part of the human birthright, because without that, then someone's like, hey, I know about this state more than you do, and let me tell you, that feeling you had, that was all about me, because
right.
like it's just
Well,
so
yeah.
like, yeah,
I mean,
exact.
like,
So yeah,
yeah,
and it's like we've been saying a lot, it's all an additive process, because like a lot of the sense making skills that I've been, that I've learned and then I've taught over the years are still equal, there's, I still draw on them all the time, equally valid, being like, okay, how do I stay in a place of sort of like agnosticism around a particular thing philosophically, so that I can see all the perspectives of it, not like collapse into one of them. That's still relevant. Trying to be aware of cognitive machinery of bias, all
Right.
these different like quite practical rationalist things. They're there, and then adding on this more non-ordinary, way of seeing the world, which has always been a part of my experience of life as well. That is it's a lot of fun because it opens up a completely new
Yeah.
ways of seeing the world. But also, I think it's genuinely, it gives new layers of understanding, experience, and possibility, which we just don't get if we just don't include those states. And like will be well also, I think, one of the good things about the course is that I think people will realize like just how many different states they have accessed or have access to, as well as as well as us kind of having some practices that can open up particular states, not psychedelics obviously, but things like breath
Yeah.
work, etc. Process work as well, which is something you've been doing for years too.
Right.
That those are particular states, but also it our whole conception of our lived conscious experience opens up a lot more if we're like, oh wait a minute, like there might be 5 or 6 different states in a day that I'm going through, and how do I navigate that really
Right.
fluently and really
Right.
really kind of dance with it.
Well, wrapping up in a couple minutes here, I just want to touch in on real quick here on one of the pieces that I think you brought into the course that I'm really excited about, and which is the AI aspect of things.
Mm.
And I know you've been diving into that quite a bit. And I've been playing with Midjourney and all the images that I've been using. I'm loving working with it. But speak a little bit to that aspect of because I think that's one of the important parts of the course, and then we can kind of wrap up our chat here. But
Yeah, I mean that's really just about, this is a new reality that we're all having to deal with pretty rapidly, and even this time last year it wasn't in the same place it
right,
is. But we have to deal with a completely different type of world in which we're actually, the internet is now, you could see the internet like a kind of drug, right? Because it
right,
actually does change our state quite regularly, and it changes the way we communicate with each other, changes how we feel, absolutely, right? Changes our access to information. So it's almost this kind of become this extension of ourselves. And now entering into that is this kind of tremendously powerful technology, which also seems to be, I mean, we often now are having the experience that it's alive and conscious in some way, right? I'm
right,
not saying it is, but I'm saying we have frequently or increasingly the experience that it is. It's becoming very hard to tell the difference. That's going to get even weirder. And so, in a way, like what AI is opening up is the internet as a realm full of intelligences. In the same way,
right,
similarly, indigenous people have been talking about that. The natural world is that there's a
right.
realm full of hidden intelligences that are ever present. So it's really bizarre because we're going full circle back to our animistic roots, and that also means a whole new set of skills are needed to navigate it well. Otherwise, we're just going to be like completely overwhelmed and bowled over. Yeah,
Yeah, and I think it's a brilliant addition the to the progression of learning these skills and non-ordinary sense making. We need to use that with AI, for sure.
mm,
So
yeah,
in the course, that sort of the first three are going to be sort of looking at states in the frame that we're using. Then we're going to be looking at using it and mapping it and sense making. And then that sort of third section, we're going to be talking more about the different types of consciousness and interacting and how to get these information, these different levels and layers. But really, being able to navigate all the different layers, the taste will just be obviously a little introduction to it. But
yeah,
I'm really excited about both the taste and the course, and just so
yeah.
appreciate
Same.
working with you. I mean, it's been just a lot of fun, and I know
Yeah,
we both also have the intention of having the course and the taster also, like, we want to have fun doing this. If it's not fun, if there's not some satisfaction and play and fun in it, like, kind of what's the point is where I am in my life right now. So,
yeah,
hard stuff comes up, and that's part of the work too,
yeah,
but there's a
yeah,
deep satisfaction with doing deep work too. But it's also
yeah,
like, let's not take ourselves too seriously and enjoy the process of it. So thank you for including me in all of your in your life over the last few years. And
yeah.
it's
Likewise,
been such
likewise,
a
and
pleasure working with you.
yeah, you too. I'm really looking forward to this because it just feels new, and that's real. That for me, that is just the most exciting thing and fun, right? It's just
Right.
there's a
Right.
kind of playfulness that comes with the new, which I think is going to be, and also, I think I have this sense that, we'll all of us on the course, of course, we're sort of, facilitating, but everyone who joins is going to be, contributing in a very big way, and it's going to be fascinating what we
Yeah.
kind of create together. So yeah, I'm
Yeah.
really looking forward to it. Yeah, and then the taster is on the 13th. There'll be info with this film as well of how people can like sign up for
Yeah.
that. Well, thanks, Trish, and
Yeah.
yeah, I'll see you very soon.
Sounds great. Thanks.